Hello students, today we are going to learn a new lesson. Reproduction and modification in plants. From this lesson, we can understand about parts of the flower and how the reproduction process takes place in plants. Students, here I included the textbook link. You can see through the link. The topics which we are going to discuss today are types of organs in a plant, reproduction, sexual reproduction and its types, types of flowers, pollination and asexual reproduction and its types. Students, in your textbook, these topics are available from page number 59 to 69. Now, let us enter into the lesson. Types of organs in a plant. A plant is mainly consist of two organs. They are vegetative organs and reproductive organs. The parts such as root, stem and leaves of a plant are known as vegetative organs, whereas flowers, fruits and seeds are known as reproductive organs. Modification of the plant. Germination is the process of seeds developing into new plants. This picture shows that a watermelon plant is produced from seeds. Actually, seed is a reproductive organ. But in the case of potato plant, it arises from the stem tuber. That means, stem is a vegetative organ to germinate into a new plant. From this, we can conclude that seed is not only the source for new generation, even vegetative part of a plant can also be used to produce a new plant. Next, reproduction. What do you mean by reproduction? The process by which plants and animals produce their young ones is known as reproduction. In plants, the reproduction is classified into two types, such as sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. Let us discuss one by one. Sexual reproduction. What is sexual reproduction? The seed is produced from a flower by the process of pollination and fertilization is known as sexual reproduction. This picture shows sexual reproduction in plants. Flower. It is the main reproductive organ of a plant. It mainly consists of four parts: petal, sepal, stamen and pistil. Petals. The attractive part of a plant which attracts insects and birds for pollination. Sepal. It holds and covers the young developing flower bud. Stamen. It is the male part of a flower that produces pollen grains. Pistil. Pistil is the female part of a flower, combines ovary, style and stigma. The stamen and pistil involved in pollination and fertilization process, which helps the seed to develop into a plant. Androecium. It is the male part of the flower. Inner to the corolla, the flower has stalked structure called stamens. This ring or whorl of a flower is called androecium. Each stamens consists of two parts. Filament called a stalk and anther called a lobe. A lobe has powdery substance in it called pollen grains. It is the male reproductive part. Next, gynoecium. It is the female part of the flower. Inner to the androecium whorl, we can find a female reproductive part of the flower called gynoecium. Seeds are produced in ovary. The top of the ovary, there is a slender tube-like structure called style. The topmost sticky tip of the style is stigma. Pollen grains are received by the stigma. Next, we move on to types of flowers. Flowers are mainly classified into bisexual and unisexual flowers. Let's see one by one. Bisexual flowers. If all the four whorls such as calyx, corolla, stamen and pistil are present, then it is called a complete flower. Complete flowers are bisexual flowers. Lily, rose, sunflower and hibiscus are some of the examples of bisexual flowers. The next type is unisexual flowers. If any of these four is missing, then it is called an incomplete flower. Incomplete flowers are unisexual flowers. Papaya, watermelon, bitter gourd, pine are some examples of unisexual flowers. Unisexual flowers are further classified into male flowers and female flowers. Male flowers. The one with androecium and without gynoecium is known as male flower. Female flowers are opposite to male flowers. The one with gynoecium and without androecium is known as female flower. Students, if you want to know more about types of flowers, you can see through the link given below. Pollination. What do you mean by pollination? The process by which the pollen grains reach stigma is called pollination. The flower that receives pollen grains called pollinated flower, while the one that doesn't receive pollen grains called unpollinated flower. Types of pollination. Pollination can be classified into 4 types. First one, artificial pollination. If we purposely transfer the pollen grains from male flower to the female flower, is known as artificial pollination. Natural pollination. If the pollen grains transferred from male flower to the female flower by natural phenomenon like insects, birds, wind, water, soil, is known as natural pollination. The next type, cross-pollination. Pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma of another flower of the same kind or different plant. Is called cross-pollination. What about self-pollination? Self-pollination is defined as pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma of same flower or to another flower of the same plant. These are the types of pollination. Pollinators. The pollinators are the agents that are helped in pollination. Beans, tomatoes are commonly self-pollinating plants. Paddy is mostly self-pollinating using just a gentle wind as the pollinating agent. Students, shall we see the difference between self and cross-pollination? Yes. Self-pollination. Pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or to another flower of the same plant. Cross-pollination. Pollen grains are transferred from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of the same kind or different plant. Plants do not need to produce pollen grains in a large quantity for self-pollination. But in the case of cross-pollination, plants need to produce pollen grains in larger quantities to increase the chance of pollination. Self-pollination does not produce changes in the characteristics of new plants. Cross-pollination does introduce variations in characteristics of new plants. Next, we move on to fertilization. Students, do you know what is fertilization? During germination, a tube develops from the pollen grains that carries male gametes that ultimately reaches female gamete inside the ovary through the style. Male gamete fuses with the female gamete to form zygote. This process is known as fertilization. Life cycle of a plant. The anther involved in pollination to produce flower. Fertilized egg becomes the embryo of seeds, and the seed germinates into a new plant. A mature plant produces flowers. The anther of it involves pollination. This process is repeated. This is the life cycle of a plant. The next type of reproduction is asexual reproduction. The production of new plants without the involvement of pollination and fertilization is known as asexual reproduction. Types of asexual reproduction: vegetative propagation, budding, fragmentation, and spore formation. Let us discuss in detail. First type, vegetative propagation. Vegetative parts of the plants such as root, stem and leaves can help to propagate the plant. For example, in potato, sugarcane and yam, the shoot arises from the eyes. Budding. If you touch cakes and breads, how do you feel? They are soft in nature. This is because cakes and breads contains yeast in it. Single yeast undergoes asymmetric division. It produces a small buds which gradually grows and detaches from the parent cell. This process is called budding. Next, fragmentation. What is fragmentation? Each fragment or piece of a filament will grow into a new filament or individual. This process is known as fragmentation. For example, Spirogyra. And the last type of asexual reproduction is spore formation. How spores are formed? During the unfavorable conditions such as scarcity of water, high temperature, nutrient deficiency in soil, etc. The non-flowering plants produces spores. They germinate into a new plant when favorable conditions are returned. For example, algae, fungi and ferns. These are the types of asexual reproduction. Students, if you want to know more in detail, see through the link. It is the time to evaluate. Students, I gave some questions regarding today's video. Try to answer all the questions. Question number 1. What are the vegetative and reproductive organs of a plant? Question number 2. What are the types of flowers? Question number 3. Differentiate self and cross pollination. Question number 4. Differentiate sexual and asexual reproduction. Question number 5. What do you mean by unfavorable conditions? So students, if you have any doubts in this session, note down and clarify once the school reopens. We will continue the lesson in next session with a new topic. Thank you students.